Good evening. I'm JBernards, and this is a presentation designed for beginning behavior therapists to learn about ABA, what are the dimensions of applied behavior analysis, what makes it different from other disciplines that study psychology. I told this thing to do a screen share, but I don't think it's doing that yet. Oh, there we go. Oh, goodness, I got it. Now, what I don't have is my presentation notes. I'm not sure how to make that show. Something else I need. Okay, these are the Zoom controls. But how to get it to show my presentation notes, I don't know. So I'm going to it's gone ahead. I'm going to pull this up on my telephone so that I can get my notes off the phone. Okay. I think I have my notes. No. I don't know if it's going to let me have two different views, one on my phone and one on the computer. Is that too? No, it's not what I want. It's not it either. I'll have a few comments. Well, Jen, since this is for you, and since it's kind of late, rather than try to go by memory, I put a lot of thought into what I wanted on my session notes. And so I'm going to use this view because it'll show my session notes. If I can maybe get this bar out of the way. Yeah, I think I can put that up there to the top. Okay, now let me maybe get this up a little closer. Okay. So this presentation is for beginning behavior therapists who are potentially going to be RBTs. And it's a first step training about applied behavior analysis and the 7 dimensions, what sets behavior analysis apart from other disciplines. So the first thing we want to talk about is, first of all, what is ABA? A lot of people nowadays have heard of ABA. They know that it's a kind of a popular treatment for a lot of kids with autism, but they don't know much more than that. So we want to explore some details about what is ABA. First of all, it's a science. It's devoted to understanding and improving behavior. And the goal of ABA is to achieve a thorough understanding of socially important behavior change on one or more of 3 levels: description, prediction, and control. So it doesn't have to talk about all 3 of those, but we want to be able to, at least one of them, we want to be able to predict what's going to happen or describe what's going to happen. And ideally, we would hope to be able to control it. We'll get into that a little bit more. So if behavior analysis is a science, what about it makes it science? So a science is a set of overriding assumptions and values that guide the work of all scientists, whether that be neuroscience or, oceanography or chemicals, any type of science is governed by these basic assumptions and values that makes their work scientific, as opposed to, for instance, fictional. What are the attitudes of science? Determinism, empiricism. Now, you may not be familiar with these words, but we're going to be familiar by the end of this presentation. Experimentation, application, parsimony, and philosophic doubt. All of these are attributes of all scientific endeavors, not just behavior analysis, but our adherence as behavior analysts makes applied behavior analysis a science by following these premises. So what is determinism? This is the assumption that the universe is lawful and orderly. Like, think of planets that are moving around the sun in the solar system. They move in an orderly manner. Chemicals that interact with each other, those interactions are orderly and predictable. Men didn't always understand what the rules are that govern those types of interactions between chemicals, per se. But through science, they've discovered what are the principles that govern how those natural events are predictable. And once they understand how predictable it is, then they can begin to control it. So the beginning premise of this is the attitude that the universe is lawful and orderly, and this is called determinism. I'm going to try to make this so I can see everything at once. That's a little better. Okay. After determinism, then we have empiricism. That's a big word, but basically what it means is that we can objectively observe and measure events. So, for instance, scientists will frequently measure the temperature of different things, or they might measure the volume or the speed of travel or the weight. These are things that scientists measure in the natural sciences. In behavioral science, we also measure very carefully and we observe. We're not basing our descriptions of what's happening on our ideas, like maybe there's this, we call them psychological constructs that other disciplines will talk about, like the id and the ego and the superego, and because of the way these things interact that way, therefore people do what they do. We don't follow any of that because it can't be seen, it cannot be observed, it cannot be validated by a second observer. Those kinds of assumptions are based on the subjective beliefs of the person who is trying to describe what's going on. So empiricism demands thorough description, systematic and repeated measurement, and precise quantification. Now, empiricism is the foremost rule in behavior analysis. Every effort to understand, predict, and improve behavior hinges on the behavior analyst's, oh goodness, something to completely define, systematically observe, and accurately and reliably measure occurrences and non-occurrence of the behavior of interest. I think on the behavior analyst's ability to completely define, systematically observe, and accurately and reliably measure the occurrence and the non-occurrence of the behavior of interest. I apologize, there's a little thing on my screen I can't get rid of that is hiding a little corner of my notes. So I apologize for that. So that's empiricism, and it's a fundamental rule of behavior analysis. Now, experimentation is also very important to behavior analysis. In experimenting, we can, if we suspect a factor that one thing may be causing something else, then in an experiment, we can systematically control and manipulate those variables and observe the effects, what happens when we manipulate those. And by doing these experiments, we can begin to reliably predict and control what is happening because we've seen it repeatedly. So we don't do it just once, we do it, we repeat that. And this is what we call replication. This cute quote by Skinner: replication is not the infallibility or inherent honesty of scientists. It is the primary reason that science is a self-correcting enterprise that ultimately gets it right. That's rather a bold statement that science ultimately gets things right, but we can see in other scientific endeavors as they've continued to experiment and correct, they get closer and closer to the truth. And they do that by trying to replicate. If one scientist has a premise or a procedure that had certain results, someone else will try it and see if they get the same or similar results. And if it works, then they begin to have a basis for saying, well, this is a principle. So in behavior analysis, we have many principles that have been established by replication. Now, parsimony, you've probably heard of Occam's razor. It's a heuristic, a little rule of thumb that helps us decide on what is probably correct. And that is that one should choose the simplest explanation, the one that requires the fewest assumptions. So that razor, Occam's razor, is going to shave away all the different ideas and theories and things that are extra, so that we can get down to the heart of what's really happening. So we want to make the fewest assumptions possible. We want to get rid of everything that's superfluous and find the simple, logical explanations. That's parsimony. And it requires that if we're trying to explain something, we're going to rule out everything that is complex or abstract. Let's see. Parsimony requires that all simple logical explanations for the phenomenon under investigation be ruled out, experimentally or conceptually, before more complex or abstract explanations are considered. So if we have several different hypotheses of why something is happening, what we're going to test first is the simplest one. And if that doesn't work, then we'll go to the one that's just a little bit more complex. But by starting with the simplest thing, hopefully we can find the correct one more quickly. Now, philosophic doubt is a willingness in science to accept facts, even when they are opposed to our wishes. So an attitude of philosophic doubt requires the scientist to continually question the truthfulness of what is regarded as fact. Scientific knowledge must always be reviewed as tentative. And that's why when we have a theory of, or an explanation of how or why something works, it may be really close to the truth, but maybe we can get a little bit closer. It's that concept of continually getting closer, but maybe never getting it exactly right. But by not accepting something as a truth, we continue to learn, we continue to study it. And that philosophic doubt is a willingness to question our own beliefs and be willing to continue to study it. Now, sometimes we may have a cherished theory of why we think something is working or what we think might be most effective. But as we study that, maybe the evidence points another way. And that's that willingness to consider something else. Now, you might be thinking, well, I'm just getting this job as a behavior therapist. What does this have to do with me? Well, behavior therapists need to have a scientific attitude, because when you are in the practice of applied behavior analysis, it's important that you be able to implement the programs correctly. And it helps to understand, well, why are we taking all this data? And why is it so important that I record exactly? Maybe we've been working so hard to teach this child something, and we really want to show that we've been making progress. And it'd be so easy to just record that she got it right. But to be scientific, we have to be truthful and record what we're actually seeing. So when we have these scientific attitudes, then we can understand the context of applied behavior analysis, because all of this science is behind the different programs that are written for individuals and the procedures that are followed. Another thing that we do as behavior analysts is we do not we continually evaluate the effectiveness of what our program has implemented. We need to always have an open mind. So just a quick review, these 6 attitudes of science. Determinism is the 6 attitudes of science are determinism, empiricism, experimentation, application, parsimony, and philosophic doubt. So science is a systematic approach to understanding natural phenomena as evidenced by description, prediction, and control. And it relies on these 6 attitudes. Behavior analysis relies on these 6 attitudes for our fundamental explanations. So the science of behavior analysis has 3 interrelated domains, and it's important to kind of have the big picture. We're going to zoom back and see what's the big picture before we zoom in and look at behavior analysis. So behaviorism is the philosophy of the science of behavior. What we've been talking about up to this point is behaviorism. It's that philosophy that behavior is predictable and we can learn from it. Basic research are the kinds of activities that are done in a lab. A lot of them are done with animals. It's called the experimental analysis of behavior. Now, a lot of those experiments are not really appropriate to conduct with human subjects because, well, just for a lot of reasons, there are things that we might be able to do with animals that we would never get permission from a parent to do with their child. So applied behavior analysis is different from an experimental analysis because we are taking those principles that have been identified through the basic research and seeking to apply them in a way that now we can use what we've learned to develop technology to improve behavior in applied settings. So the goal of ABA, applied behavior analysis, is to develop and apply technology for improving behavior in socially significant ways. What does that mean? Socially significant behaviors, that's kind of our byword in ABA, can improve the quality of life for individuals. So we're not interested in, timing how fast they can get from point A to point B with various obstacles in the way. We are more interested in seeing, can they learn how to functionally fill out a job application, or can they learn how to put on their shoes and tie their shoes by themselves, things that are important to individuals for their quality of life. These are socially significant behaviors. Now, behavior therapists are critical in the applied behavior analysis because the successful application of behavior analysis hinges on the close adherence of BTs to the principles and dimensions of ABA. The BCBA may go to great effort to design and program and do functional analysis and determine a program that's going to help a particular client. Well, now they're going to rely on the behavior therapist to implement that with fidelity. And what that means is they're going to very closely adhere to exactly what has been written. So when we are implementing those programs of behavior analysis, we are using ABA as a tool to move forward with our socially significant goals. We have a little acronym that I like to think of as moving forward. When you get a cab, you want to go somewhere, get a cab. We have 7 dimensions that describe applied behavior analysis. They are generality, effective, technological, applied, conceptually systematic, analytic, and behavioral. So get a cab is a little acronym that will help us remember that. If you're trying to remember, well, what are those 7 different dimensions? Oh, I want to go somewhere, I got to get a cab, and you can remember those. Now we'll look at those a little more closely. Generality is a very important part of teaching socially significant behaviors. In this example, children with developmental delays and especially language deficits can sometimes have a lot of difficulty getting attention. They might push, they might scream, they might, throw something. They're trying to get attention, possibly, or they might be trying to do something else. But when specifically in getting attention, we can use applied behavior analysis effectively to teach this skill. Well, when someone learns how to gain attention appropriately, they're going to use that skill over and over again the rest of their life. Think of how many different settings you may be in where you're going to raise your hand. Besides in the classroom, maybe in a restaurant, you need the waiter, you're going to raise your hand, or maybe you're in line at a theater and someone passes by you and you're like, wait, there's always reasons that you need to get attention, and raising your hand is a well-known gesture to call attention. So generality is taking a behavior that we've learned and having it occur in different settings, and then spreading to other behaviors that are not directly treated by the intervention. So we may be teaching that child to raise their hand here. Well, then maybe they may be at home and mom is busy on the telephone, and maybe that child can stand in front of mom and raise their hand to get mom's attention. Something like that would be spreading to other areas that were not directly targeted in the intervention. Get a cab. Our next one is an E for effective. Now, effective application of behavior change must improve the behavior under question in a practical way. So in this example of this picture, we're looking at what's called on-task behavior and attending to the teacher. Frequently in schools, there might be a few children who have difficulty staying on task or listening to the teacher. And ABA has been used very effectively to help children learn that critical behavior, to stay on task and to attend to the teacher. And in a similar way, it's been used to teach teachers how they can help children learn these skills. So it goes both ways. That's effective, and effective can apply and should apply to any socially significant skill that we're trying to teach. Now, technological in applied behavior analysis has a different meaning than what we generally associate. We're not talking about electronics or screen time or anything like that. We are talking about description of what is being done in the therapy in such a clear way that someone could be able to read a procedure and then turn around and implement it based on what they read. And when we say with fidelity, that means that it's going to be accurate. It's going to be consistent between therapists. So in a clinical setting with ABA, as we try to teach generality, one of those things we teach is between therapists. We want the child to be able to do the same thing with several different people. That's teaching generality. And in order to do that, we have to be very technological with our descriptions of exactly how they're doing it, so that everybody, all the therapists, are doing things the same way. In this little example here, the therapist could read the program, and it might say, the SD is which blank is blue in a field of 3. And then that little bit of instruction could be just written for the BT. And then she knows to take 3 items, different colors, put them on the table, and then ask the child which Play-Doh is blue. And then the child can pick up the blue one and give it to the teacher. And then the child will be reinforced for that behavior. That's a technological description of how that stimulus discrimination is being taught. Applied, the A in get a cab stands for applied. A primary question in the evaluation of applied research is, how immediately important is this behavior or these stimuli to this subject? So in this little picture, I think it's probably every parent's worst nightmare to have their child out of control in a public place. This behavior is very important, both to the child and to the parents. And so in applied behavior analysis, we want to target behaviors that are socially significant, meaning they are urgently important to the people that are dealing with it. And also, as opposed to doing it in a controlled laboratory setting, we want to ultimately be able to change these behaviors in their natural settings and with the significant others in that child's life. Now, conceptually systematic, one reason that we have that section about all the philosophy of science is because we need to understand what the concepts of applied behavior analysis are so that we can be systematic and consistent. So what this means is that the procedures that we use for changing behavior are derived from and explained in terms of the relevant principles. So in experimental analysis of behavior, they've been able to identify behavioral principles such as a behavior that is followed when a behavior is followed by a stimuli that occurs after the behavior and then the behavior increases, we call that a reinforcer. So when the client or the individual encounters a reinforcer, that behavior is going to increase once that reinforcer has been identified. And when we can relate our behavior change procedures to the basic principles, now we can use those systematic things that we have learned to design programs that are successful in other situations, and also to help students who are trying to learn about behavior analysis and parents who are trying to learn how to deal with their child. By understanding the principles, it makes more sense. So a little story that I laugh about, I had a parent talking to me once about a child, and she said, I just don't get it. This child is doing this same irritating behavior every night at dinner time. And the mom says, I punish her. I send her to her room, and I always punish her, and she keeps doing it. And I just don't know what to do. Well, the principle of behavior analysis says that because this behavior is continuing and is maintained, then what the mom is doing is not a punishment. That child is being reinforced. Her behavior is being reinforced because she's getting something she wants. Maybe she's getting out of doing the dishes. Maybe she's getting out of eating her vegetables. Maybe she just likes having freedom in her room with nobody to bother her. She's finding that very reinforcing, and so she's continuing that behavior. So when we understand the principles of behavior, then instead of just very specific things, if this happens, do that, if that happens, do this, and just a collection of tricks. This is how some have explained it, just lots of little rules about different things to do in different situations. No, we're going to step back, look at the bigger picture, and look at what the principles are. And then when things happen, it can make sense. And it can guide how we respond. Because one thing is for sure about children, they're going to do something that's going to surprise you. And so understanding the principles and being conceptually systematic will help us respond in ways that will encourage good behavior. Now, analytic, I like this little picture because oftentimes when we think of analytic, we're going to think of lots of mathematical equations or something like that. In behavior analysis, that analytic has a different meaning. Analytic means that we have studied this behavior well enough to understand what makes it happen and how we can avoid it happening, or when it starts to happen, how we can stop it happening. So in this little picture of a game controller, you can look at your little child who is so smart. They're doing an analysis of that game to figure out which buttons to push, literally, so that they can make that character in that game do what they want them to do. And as behavior analysts, we want to study the behavior to figure out what we have to do to get the kind of result that we want. So the quote here from Baer et al. Says, by common, an experimenter has achieved an analysis of behavior when he can exercise control over it. By common laboratory standards, that has meant an ability of the experimenter to turn the behavior on and off or up and down at will. So just like a child can control a video game, a good behavior analyst can start and stop different types of behaviors. And a lot of times when we're looking at socially important behaviors, some of those we want to encourage, and some of those need to be stopped because they're problematic, like biting or hitting or running away. So that's our goal as behavior analysts. We got to understand it so we can know what to do, and that's what we mean by analytic. And finally, get a cab. The B on cab is for behavioral. And what this means, behavior analysts conduct studies of behavior, not studies about behavior. So rather than read books and listen to podcasts and try to learn, well, there's definitely a lot to be learned from that, but more importantly, we're going to observe, we're going to watch what really happens. And in doing so, we need precise and reliable measurements that observe the occurrence or the non-occurrence of the behavior in their natural setting. Now, these measurements, in order to be able to measure, we have to have definitions that have to be so clear that multiple observers can agree on whether or not the behavior occurred. Now, I love this picture of the baseball scoreboard because it's something familiar that we understand. This is a way of measuring behaviors that multiple observers understand. Did the batter hit the ball? Did he hit it within the defined area that it's a hit that he can run on? Did he strike out? Has he struck out 3 times? Or did the pitcher pitch the ball into the little strike zone? And the rules of the game are so clearly defined that multiple people can agree on whether or not that rule was followed. And even so, we have to have referees in games that judge, was that behavior, did it follow the rules? So behavior in analysis and applied behavior, we need definitions that clearly define what is happening and what it is that we are counting. Okay, he ran all the way around all the bases, but did he touch the home plate? No, so we cannot count that. So we need to know in other types of behavior whether or not we can count what just happened. So finally, in applied behavior analysis, because it is complex, there's a lot to do to be able to implement behavioral programs. We have to work together as a team. Now, an important part of working as a team, it hinges on this ability to completely define, systematically observe, and accurately and reliably measure occurrences and non-occurrences of the behavior of interest. Now, the reason that half of this paragraph is in yellow is because those things that are in yellow are tasks that are regularly performed by an RBT. And the BCBA will most likely do the understanding, predicting, and designing programs to improve the behavior. But then they have to work with the RBT so the RBT understands what they need to do. The BCBA will systematically observe the RBT to see if that RBT is implementing the program with fidelity. And the RBT needs to be very carefully observing the client and recording the data, whether or not the behavior of interest is occurring. And based on the data that is recorded, then the BCBA can determine, is this program effective, or do we need to modify it a little bit? And that is one of the attitudes of the science of applied behavior analysis, is that we want to continually evaluate what we're doing so that we can improve it and get closer and closer to the target goal. So just in closing, RBTs are doing really important work. You're helping individuals gain socially significant change. Just today, I talked to a mother who started to cry because her 4-year-old daughter, for the first time, used a speech generating device to say, "I am Cece." she was able to say her name. That is a socially significant goal. And this is important work that RBTs are doing. And I hope you have gained a little bit more understanding, a little bit perspective of what it is that you're doing and how you fit in to the group objective of improving behavior in socially significant ways. Thank you. Good night. I don't know how to turn this off.